The highway stretched ahead in a blur of gray as I gripped the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. My arms ached from hauling lumber and paint cans all day, but it didn't matter anymore. Today had been my last shift at the hardware store. The job had kept me afloat, barely. But tomorrow I wouldn't have to stand under flickering fluorescent lights or smile at customers who didn't even look at me. Next week, I'd be stepping back into the work I was trained for welding. Real pay, real stability. The thought carried me through the fatigue. I even hummed along faintly to the oldies station on the radio, tapping my thumb against the wheel. In my head, I was already planning. The first check would go straight to catching up on bills. Then I'd finally pay off the small debt to Mom, $200. Nothing huge, but enough that she wouldn't be able to use it against me anymore. The idea of standing in the kitchen, sliding folded bills across the counter, made me smile. I wanted her to see that I was getting back on my feet. As I turned off the highway into the neighborhood, that small, cautious warmth stayed with me. The houses here all looked the same trimmed hedges. Shutters faded from too many winters. Ours was no different, though I'd always noticed Mom prided herself on keeping the porch steps spotless. A normal evening should have greeted me lights on. Maybe Dad pacing with the TV blasting in the background. Instead, I saw a cluster of figures on the lawn. At first, I slowed only out of curiosity, my mind sluggish with exhaustion. A yard sale, a neighborhood spat. Then my eyes adjusted to the shapes. Black garbage bags, dozens spilled across the grass, some already split open. I felt a cold twist in my chest as I pulled my old Civic to the curb across the street. The crowd wasn't strangers. They were my neighbors. Some had their phones out. Others leaned on porch rails like they were watching a show. And there, in the center of it all, were my parents and siblings, standing like actors on a stage. Confusion throbbed into dread as I cut the engine, my gaze fixed on the heap of belongings scattered across the wet lawn. I stepped out of the car, my legs heavy as if each stride dragged me deeper into something I couldn't undo. The closer I came, the clearer the picture became. Those black bags weren't just trash, they were my life, stuffed and knotted without care, spilling across the yard for anyone to pick through with their eyes. A pair of jeans clung to the wet grass. My winter coat lay half-draped over a torn bag, and the box that held my college welding certificates had collapsed, papers scattered like scraps in the wind. Mom stood in the middle of it, phone raised like she was filming a breaking news segment. Her voice was sharp, rehearsed, almost gleeful. 29 years old, still living in my basement, pathetic. Time to grow up. I froze, the words stinging worse than the eyes of the neighbors. Some of them shifted, whispering, but others didn't bother to hide their smirks. Lila angled her phone toward me, the bright red light of her live stream glaring. Say hi to my followers. Corinna, the world should meet the freeloader. She giggled, tossing her hair as though this were entertainment. Not my entire life unraveling. Marcus kicked one of the bags, sending a burst of clothes rolling into the gutter. Finally. She's gone, he muttered, loud enough for me to hear, like he'd been waiting for this moment. Dad didn't speak. He just stood on the porch with his arms crossed, jaw tight, watching like a judge about to hand down a sentence. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt locked. The humiliation pressed in from all sides, my family grinning behind their phones, the neighbors pointing, the small-town gossip already writing itself. For a heartbeat, I wanted to scream, to grab the phone from Lila's hands and smash it into the grass. But I didn't. I kept walking forward, forcing myself to stand taller. Even as the world closed in around me, Dad finally moved. He stepped down from the porch, slow and deliberate, like every motion was calculated. Without warning, something silver flicked through the air. My spare car keys smacked hard against my cheekbone and clattered to the ground at my feet. "You're not my daughter anymore," he said. voice flat, carrying across the lawn for every neighbor to hear. "You've got 30 minutes to get off this property or I'm calling the cops for trespassing." I bent to pick up the keys, my fingers trembling more from rage than pain. For a moment, the scene blurred around me. Mom's phone tilted to catch my reaction, Lila whispering into her live stream, Marcus pacing with restless energy. It was too clean, too rehearsed. They hadn't just lost patience. They had planned this. Rent. That was the excuse. I'd been short $200, not $8,000 like Lila had shouted. The rest was paid, nearly up to date, and Mom knew it, but none of that mattered. This wasn't about money. It was about spectacle, about control, about the story Mom wanted to tell. I straightened and forced my breath steady. Yelling, crying, breaking down, that was what they wanted. I could see it in Lila's eager eyes, the way she leaned closer with her phone raised like a weapon. I wouldn't give her the footage. I walked to the nearest bag, lifted it onto my shoulder, and carried it to my car. Another trip, then another. Ignoring Marcus's muttered insults and Mom's narration, neighbors whispered behind their hands. Someone even laughed when a box split, spilling books onto the pavement. I gathered them all without a word, bag after bag until the car sagged low. I closed the trunk, climbed behind the wheel, and turned the key. The porch light glared in the rearview mirror as I pulled away, the sound of their laughter following me into the night. Mike's apartment was barely big enough for the two of us, but he didn't hesitate when I knocked that night with a trunk full of bags. He helped me haul everything inside, no questions asked, and cleared a corner of the couch where I could crash. I didn't sleep, though. My mind kept replaying the lawn, the phones, my father's voice declaring I wasn't his daughter. By morning, the news had already spread. Mike's girlfriend showed me a clip that had made its way onto social media, Lila's stream, cut into bite-sized humiliation for strangers to consume. I couldn't even bring myself to watch the whole thing. Later, Mike told me what he'd heard through the grapevine. Apparently, Lila had been snooping in my room while I was at work. She found the letter from the welding company with my start date and salary. Instead of being glad, she rushed it to Mom. It all made sense then, the sudden shift from breakfast at the kitchen table to my belongings on the lawn. Mom had been telling anyone who'd listened that I was a freeloader, unemployed, draining her savings just by existing. She wore it like a badge of martyrdom, the long-suffering mother with the lazy daughter. It earned her sympathy, attention, even gossiping allies. The letter shattered that story. A daughter with a steady job, moving forward, meant she lost her role as the victim, rather than admit she'd lied. She doubled down, turned me into a public spectacle before the truth could come out. I sat on that couch, the letter folded neatly in my hands, and felt something sharp settle inside me. It wasn't shock anymore, or grief. It was clarity. My eviction hadn't been about money. It had been about control, and about a woman so desperate to be pitied that she would destroy her own child's dignity. I folded the letter back into its envelope and slid it into my bag. Knowing I would need it again, Mike's couch sagged in the middle, the springs poking through, but it was still a safe place to land. I lay there at night staring at the ceiling, my bags stacked along the wall like silent witnesses. The humiliation replayed itself in loops, the jeers from the neighbors, the bags split open on the lawn, my mother's voice slicing through me with that practiced tone. Every time the images rose, I forced them back down. I knew if I let myself unravel, they would win. I kept my phone on silent, but the screen lit up every few minutes with messages. Mom's voice notes, first furious, then syrupy sweet, then threatening to donate the rest of my things. Lila's texts came with screenshots of comments from her followers, mocking me like I was some character in her feed. Dad stayed silent. Marcus sent a single line, "Don't come back." I deleted nothing, saving every word as though they were pieces of evidence. Each morning, I woke up before Mike left for work, folded the blanket neatly, and made coffee as though it were my own place. I refused to let the shame turn me into what they accused me of being. I applied myself fully at the hardware store for the few days left, knowing that when Monday came, I'd step into a job that actually respected my skills. I repeated it to myself like a prayer. I would not beg. I would not explain myself to people who never listened. I would rise without them. On Sunday evening, I walked along the river near Mike's apartment, the cold air stinging my cheeks. I thought of the girl I had been just a week earlier, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal, believing breakfast with Mom meant peace. That girl was gone. In her place was someone harder, quieter, but steadier. I wasn't sure yet how I'd rebuild. The details were a blur, saving for my own place, maybe finding roommates, starting over from scratch. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: this betrayal would not define me. It would fuel me. And 6 months later, it did. 6 months passed like chapters torn from a book, marked not by milestones, but by the quiet rhythm of ordinary days. I had moved out of Mike's place within the first month, determined not to overstay the kindness he'd already given me. The apartment I found wasn't much one bedroom. Thin walls, a heater that rattled in the winter, but it was mine. No one could throw my things on the lawn here. The welding job proved steadier than I'd dared to hope. The first weeks were hard, my muscles screaming from long shifts, but the familiarity of the work steadied me. Sparks flying off steel, the glow of molten seams, it reminded me of who I had been before everything collapsed. I earned my first raise at the 3-month mark, a small one, but enough to breathe easier when rent was due. Evenings became lessons in self-sufficiency. I learned to cook without burning the pan, to mend the holes in my socks instead of throwing them out, to balance bills without slipping behind. Some nights I sat with coworkers at a cheap diner, laughing over greasy fries, realizing it was the first real laughter I'd had in years. My phone never stayed quiet, though every few weeks, another message would appear. Mom's tone swung like a pendulum. One day, all caps fury. You're selfish. You'll regret this. Another day, syrupy concern. Are you eating enough? Honey? We're worried. Lila tried too, framing it as content, asking if I'd consider reuniting on camera. Marcus stayed mostly silent. Dad never reached out at all. I didn't respond, not once, but I kept every message, tucked away in a folder, proof of the cycle I refused to step back into. Silence became my shield. Every time I glanced at their words and let them pass without reply, I felt myself harden a little more, not in bitterness, but in resolve. It wasn't glamorous, this new life of mine. My furniture was mismatched, my car still dented, my future still uncertain. But each night I turned the key in my own lock, and that small sound meant freedom. Then, on the eve of my 30th birthday, silence broke with a single message. The night before I turned 30, I was folding laundry when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another ad or reminder from the bank. But the name on the screen froze me in place. Mom. For a moment, I just stared, the weight of 6 months pressing down. I hadn't seen her name light up my phone since the last round of messages I refused to answer. My thumb hovered, and against my better judgment, I opened it. Come home. Honey, we're throwing you a birthday party. The words blurred for a second, my chest tightening with something I couldn't name. After half a year of silence, after being dragged through mud in front of neighbors and strangers online, this was what she chose to say, sweetness dripping in every letter. As if nothing had happened, I sat on the edge of the bed, the glow of the screen harsh in the dim room. Part of me felt the old ache, the pull of wanting to believe she meant it, that maybe, somehow, this was her way of apologizing. The child in me still wanted a family to celebrate with. But the memory came back sharp garbage bags spilling open on the lawn, my father's voice declaring I wasn't their daughter. Lila's phone pointed at me like a weapon. The humiliation had seared too deep to be forgotten by a single message. I set the phone face down on the bedspread and stared at the small apartment around me, my apartment, built with my own paychecks, furnished with mismatched pieces I'd carried one by one up the stairs. It wasn't much, but it was real, and it was mine. The phone buzzed again, her words waiting. I didn't open them. Instead, I exhaled slowly, knowing I had a choice to make. I turned the phone over again and again that night, the message glowing like bait on a hook. A birthday party. The words sounded harmless, almost kind, but beneath them I felt the sharp edge of something familiar. My mother had always known how to dangle what I wanted most, only to snatch it away at the moment of truth. I imagined walking into that house, the neighbors peeking from their porches, my family lined up with practiced smiles. I could see the phones already in their hands, recording my return, packaging my pain into content once more. The memory was too vivid, the garbage bags splitting in the rain, my father's voice cutting me down, my sister's laughter as strangers online piled on. No cake or candles could erase that. The next morning, a direct message popped up on my social feed. Leela. Her words oozed cheer. Hey, sis. I know things got heated, but I think we could do a reconciliation video. My followers love redemption arcs. It would be huge for both of us. I didn't even hesitate. I blocked her. Watching the screen go blank felt like snapping a chain I hadn't realized I was still carrying. For hours after, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold, letting the quiet sink in. It wasn't them I longed for, it was the version of family I used to imagine, the one that never really existed. That realization stung at first, then settled into something calmer. By evening, I felt lighter. They could send their invitations, their manipulations dressed up as affection, but I no longer had to answer. I had built a life outside their walls, small but steady, and it was beginning to feel like enough. The next day, I decided I would celebrate my birthday differently. On the morning of my birthday, I woke to silence. No knocks on the door, no raised voices, no phones aimed at me like weapons, just sunlight spilling through thin curtains and the hum of the heater. I decided that was enough of a gift. I spent the afternoon baking a small cake from a box mix I'd picked up the night before. It came out lopsided, the frosting uneven, but I didn't care. I set it on the chipped counter, lit a single candle, and whispered a quiet wish before blowing it out. Then I poured a glass of cheap wine and raised it to myself. For the first time in years, I toasted not what I wanted, but what I had. Evening came with a knock at the door. When I opened it, 3 of my coworkers stood there grinning, balancing bags of takeout and a six-pack. "Surprise!" one of them said, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. We ate noodles from cartons, laughed about shop stories, and for a few hours the apartment felt warmer than any house I'd grown up in. As they left, I stood in the doorway, holding the half-empty cake plate and realizing my eyes were dry. No anger, no hollow ache, no tears, just peace. This was the first birthday I hadn't cried, and when the quiet returned, it felt like mine to keep. A few weeks after my birthday, I found myself idly scrolling through old messages when her name appeared again. Mom's last text sat there, unopened since that night. "Come home. Honey, we're throwing you a birthday party." I tapped it once, read it slowly, and waited for the familiar sting to rise. Nothing came. No pull, no guilt, just silence inside me. I set the phone down and thought of each of them. Mom hadn't wanted a daughter, she'd wanted a prop, someone to hold up as the reason she was long suffering, someone whose failures made her shine. Lila hadn't wanted a sister, she wanted content. Clicks, validation from strangers. Dad had wanted obedience, the kind that didn't question or resist. And Marcus. Well, he'd always wanted someone beneath him, someone to point at and say, "At least I'm not her." The weight of it should have crushed me, but instead it felt lighter. I wasn't carrying it anymore. I walked out onto the balcony of my apartment, the chill of early spring pressing against my skin. The city stretched before me, lights blinking, voices drifting from the street below. I leaned against the railing, the hum of life around me steady and real. Maybe one day I would hear their voices again, but it would never be like before. If they came, it would be on my terms, not theirs. I no longer hated them. That part had burned out, but I didn't need them, either. And that was its own kind of freedom. I closed the phone, set it aside, and let the night air fill my lungs as I turned toward the life I had chosen.